The baby monitor crackled to life. My husband's voice, but not for me. Your real mommy will be home soon. My fingers shook as I pried open his office safe. Inside, an adoption decree with my own signature, one I never remembered signing. The nanny's hands closed around my throat before I could scream. Now I'm holding a blood-stained T-square, my breath ragged. And the truth is worse than I imagined. My own hand betrayed me first. The nursery air was thick with the scent of lavender and the low, rhythmic hum of the humidifier, a sound like a distant waterfall meant to soothe a child to sleep. Sarah Miller stood in the darkened hallway, her hand trembling as she gripped the small plastic baby monitor. It was 10:14 p.m. The digital clock on the wall pulsed a steady red, a heartbeat in the gloom. Through the speaker, a voice emerged. Not the soft, melodic tone Mark used when they were out at dinner in Greenwich, but a wet, heavy whisper that made the hair on her arms stand up. Soon, Leo. Mark's voice crackled through the static. The waiting is the hardest part, isn't it? But your real mommy will be home soon. We won't have to play pretend with her anymore. I'll make sure she never finds us. The words felt like shards of ice sliding down Sarah's spine. She held her breath, her lungs burning, afraid that even the sound of her respiration might be caught by the sensitive microphone upstairs. She heard the floorboards groan, a familiar, heavy thud of Mark's boots moving toward the nursery door. Sarah retreated into the shadows of the master bedroom, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She reached into her pocket and felt the cold, hard plastic of her digital recorder. Click beep, timestamp, 22:16. She whispered into the device, her voice a mere ghost of a sound. Mark is speaking to Leo about a replacement. He called me a pretender. The house smells of cedar and a lie I can't quite map yet. She waited, frozen, until she heard the heavy front door thud shut. The crunch of gravel beneath his tires signaled his departure for the airport. Only when the red taillights faded into the misty gray of the Greenwich night did Sarah allow herself to move. The silence that rushed back into the house was suffocating, a heavy blanket of dread. She didn't mourn the betrayal. She didn't have time. She was an architect, and when a structure was failing, you didn't weep for the blueprints. You hunted for the flaw in the foundation. She moved toward Mark's home office, her socks sliding silently over the polished hardwood. The room smelled of expensive scotch and old leather. Sarah didn't turn on the overhead light. Instead, she used the small, focused beam of a flashlight. She headed straight for the north wall, where a massive framed blueprint of the Shard in London hung. To anyone else, it was a piece of professional decor. To Sarah, who knew the exact measurements of every stud and joist in this house, the frame was hung 3/4 of an inch too far to the left of the central stud. She gripped the edges of the heavy oak frame, her knuckles turning the color of unbaked dough. With a grunt of effort, she swung the picture aside. There it was, a dull gray metal door embedded in the drywall. The safe. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing Mark's hands. She remembered the way he cracked his knuckles, thumb, index, pinky, before he told a lie. She thought of his favorite dates, the ones he used for every password because he was a man of habit disguised as a man of mystery. She tried their anniversary. Nothing. She tried Leo's birthday. The mechanism remained stubborn. Then, she remembered the date he had won the Wilson account, the day he said his real life began. 0612. The lock gave a mechanical thunk, a sound of heavy tumblers falling into place. The door swung open with a metallic whine that felt loud enough to wake the neighbors. Inside, the safe was a cold, dark maw. Sarah reached in, her fingers brushing against several hard plastic drives and a thick, leather-bound manila folder. She pulled the folder out. It felt heavy, laden with the weight of a life she didn't recognize. She began to flip through the pages, her flashlight dancing over legal headers and official seals. Her eyes caught on a name, Elena Vance. Below it, the words "biological mother" were printed in stark, unapologetic black ink. Sarah's breath hitched. She began to dictate into her recorder, her voice trembling but precise. "I am holding a document that claims a woman named Elena Vance is Leo's mother. The paper is dated 3 years ago. The ink smells of fresh toner. This is the blueprint of my erasure." "What are you doing in here, Sarah?" The voice was like a cold splash of water. Sarah spun around, the flashlight beam jerking across the room until it landed on Chloe, the nanny. Chloe stood in the doorway, her athletic frame silhouetted by the hall light. Her hair was pulled back in that signature, tight ponytail, and her expression was as neutral as a blank wall. She didn't look like the sweet girl who made Leo grilled cheese sandwiches. She looked like a sentry. "It's late, Chloe," Sarah said, trying to steady her voice. She clutched the folder to her chest. "I thought you were asleep in the guest wing." Chloe didn't answer. Instead, she stepped into the room, her movements fluid and predatory. Sarah noticed the way Chloe's eyes scanned the open safe and then locked onto the folder. The nanny's hands were slightly damp. Sarah could hear the faint sound of her rubbing her palms against her leggings, the ritual of someone preparing for a physical task. "Mark told me you might get confused tonight," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave. "He said your medicine makes you imagine things. Give me the folder, Sarah. Let's go back to bed before you hurt yourself." "I'm not confused, Chloe. I can read a contract." Sarah backed away, her hip hitting the edge of the mahogany desk. Her hand searched the surface, fingers brushing against cold metal. She found it. The heavy, steel drafting T-square she had left there earlier. Chloe lunged. She was fast, a blur of gray cotton and focused intent. She grabbed Sarah's wrists, her grip like iron bands. The folder hit the floor with a dull thud. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs as Chloe shoved her against the wall, the back of Sarah's head barking against the drywall. "You don't understand how this works," Chloe hissed, her face inches from Sarah's. "You're just a placeholder. You were always just a placeholder." Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline, a primal heat that drowned out the fear. She twisted her arm, the T-square still gripped in her right hand. With a guttural cry, she swung the heavy metal bar. It caught Chloe square on the forearm with a sickening crack, the sound of wood snapping in the winter. Chloe shrieked, her grip loosening as she recoiled, clutching her arm. Sarah didn't wait. She scooped up the folder, her fingers scrambling over the leather, and bolted for the door. She sprinted down the hallway, the sound of her own frantic breathing echoing off the minimalist art on the walls. She reached the mudroom, grabbed her car keys from the hook, and burst out into the night. The cold air hit her like a physical blow. She scrambled into her SUV, the engine roaring to life with a mechanical growl that shattered the silence of the cul-de-sac. As she backed out of the driveway, she saw Chloe standing in the doorway, her face pale in the porch light, one arm hanging limp at her side. Sarah drove. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to be away from the eggshell white houses and the manicured lawns that hid monsters. She pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner 3 towns over, the neon sign flickering a sickly pink against the rain-slicked asphalt. With trembling hands, she opened the folder under the dome light of the car. She needed to see the lie. She needed to understand how Mark had done this. She flipped to the final page of the adoption decree, expecting to see a clumsy forgery, a jagged imitation of her name. Subverted. Sarah's eyes traced the lines of the document, searching for the flaw. She looked for a misspelled word, a crooked seal, a date that didn't align with the architectural logs she kept so meticulously. But the document was pristine. It was a legal masterwork, detailing a voluntary surrender of parental rights. Then she reached the signature line. Sarah felt the world tilt. The steering wheel seemed to recede into the distance. There, at the bottom of the page, was her signature. It wasn't a copy. It wasn't a digital scan. The ink was slightly raised where the pen had pressed into the fiber of the paper. She recognized the specific way she looped her S, the sharp architectural slant of the M. It was her handwriting. "No," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never signed this. I would never." She closed her eyes, trying to force her memory to yield a moment, a room, a pen. She thought back to 6 months ago. The stomach flu Mark said she had. He had brought her papers in bed, his voice a soothing murmur about insurance forms and hospital consent. She had been so tired, her head spinning from the medication he kept giving her in those little plastic cups. He had held the pen for her. He had pointed to the X. She realized then that this wasn't just a sudden betrayal. This was a long-term demolition. Mark hadn't just stolen her son. He had used her own hand to build the cage. He had gaslit her so thoroughly that she had participated in her own erasure. The signature was genuine because she had been a ghost in her own life for months, signing away her existence while he smoothed her hair and told her she was just tired. The weight of the realization hit her like a physical weight, pressing the air from her chest. She wasn't just fighting Mark. She was fighting a version of herself that he had carefully, surgically dismantled. She looked at her hands, the same hands that had designed skyscrapers, and saw them shaking. She was a fugitive with a stolen file, a broken nanny behind her, and a legal document that proved she didn't exist as a mother. She was worse than alone. She was invalidated by her own hand. Sarah reached for her phone, needing to hear a sane voice, needing to call the bank, to anchor herself in the world of numbers and facts that usually sustained her. She tapped the screen, but it remained dark. She pressed the power button, holding it until her thumb ached. Nothing. She plugged it into the car's charger, waiting for the familiar glow of the Apple logo. The screen flickered once, a jagged line of static crossing the glass. And then a message appeared in stark white text. "Device deactivated. Contact account holder. Asterisk. He cut me off," she breathed. The smell of the car's interior, stale coffee and leather, suddenly felt like a tomb. She pulled out her wallet, her fingers fumbling for her debit card. She needed a train ticket, a hotel, something. She drove to a nearby gas station, the fluorescent lights buzzing with a high-pitched whine that set her teeth on edge. She swiped the card at the ATM, the machine groaning as it processed the request. Unauthorized access. Card retained. The machine swallowed the plastic with a mechanical gulp. Sarah stood there, staring at the empty slot, her reflection in the scratched plexiglass looking like a stranger. She was digitally erased. No phone, no money, no identity. Mark had flipped a switch and turned her into a ghost. She remembered the payphone at the edge of the lot, a relic of a different era, its chrome battered and its cord thick with grime. She scavenged through her center console, finding 3 quarters and a handful of sticky nickels. She fed the coins into the slot, the clink, clink, clink of the metal falling into the belly of the machine, sounding like a countdown. She dialed a number she knew by heart. Jennifer Brown's office. A tired voice answered on the third ring. Jen, it's Sarah. Don't hang up. Please, don't hang up. Sarah, where are you? Mark has been calling everyone. He says you had a breakdown, that you attacked the nanny and ran off with Leo's medical files. The police are at your house, Sarah. He's lying, Jen. I have the files. He's trying to replace me. I found a contract. A woman named Elena Vance. You have to help me. I have nowhere else to go. There was a long pause on the other end. The sound of a pen tapping against a desk. Tap, tap, tap. My father always said, "A quiet witness is a lying witness." And you're being very loud right now, Sarah. Get to my office. Use the back entrance. I'll keep the lights low. Sarah drove through the pre-dawn gray, her eyes burning. The city of Greenwich felt different now. Hostile, a grid of traps. She reached Jennifer's law office, a sterile glass building that looked like an ice cube in the morning mist. She slipped through the service door, the smell of industrial cleaner and stale air hitting her as she climbed the stairs. Jennifer was waiting in her office. The AC was humming at a bone-chilling 62 degrees, and the lawyer sat behind her massive, empty mahogany desk, her sharp bobbed hair perfectly in place despite the hour. She was wearing a bright red power suit that looked like a warning sign. "Show me," Jennifer said, her voice a sharp instrument. Sarah laid the leather folder on the desk. Jennifer flipped through the pages, her eyes scanning the legalese with the speed of a predator. She didn't look at the signatures first. She looked at the structure. "This is a masterpiece, Sarah," Jennifer whispered, her voice tinged with a reluctant professional respect. "It's not just an adoption. It's a total legal erasure. These documents claim you voluntarily surrendered your rights during a medical consultation for postpartum psychosis. It's all backed by hospital records, pharmacy receipts for heavy sedatives, even a video deposition where you appear to be nodding in agreement." "I was drugged, Jen. He was giving me vitamins every night." "The law doesn't care about vitamins, Sarah. It cares about the paper. And the paper says you walked away. If you go to the police now, they won't see a victim. They'll see a mentally unstable woman who attacked a domestic employee and stole confidential records." Suddenly, a piercing wail erupted from outside. Sarah jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. It was her car alarm, a rhythmic, aggressive honking that vibrated through the office windows. Sarah rushed to the glass. Ashtutu. Below, in the street, her SUV was flashing its lights like a dying star. And across the street, idling in the shadows of a parking garage, was a black SUV. The windows were tinted a deep, impenetrable black. It sat there, a silent, heavy presence, its engine a low-frequency growl that Sarah felt in her teeth. "They found me," Sarah whispered. "How did they find me?" "The car," Jennifer said, her voice tight. "Mark owns the lease. It has a tracker. Sarah, you have to leave. Now. If they catch you here, they'll say I'm harboring a fugitive." Sarah grabbed the folder and ran. She didn't use the elevator. She hit the stairs, her boots echoing in the concrete well. She burst out the back door into the alleyway, the smell of damp garbage and wet brick filling her nose. She didn't go for her car. She ran toward the main road, her lungs screaming. She found a taxi, a battered yellow sedan that smelled of old cigarettes. "The Pineview Motel," she told the driver, throwing a crumpled $20 bill onto the front seat. "And don't stop for anything." The motel was a collection of cracked asphalt and flickering neon. Sarah checked in under a false name, paying in cash she'd hidden in her glove box weeks ago. She sat on the edge of the bed, the damp smell of the room clinging to her skin. She needed a plan. She needed to look at the other files she'd taken, the ones Mark hadn't mentioned. But as she walked across the parking lot to the vending machine, the black SUV roared around the corner. It didn't slow down. It skidded across the asphalt, blocking her path to her room. Two men stepped out. They weren't police. They wore tactical vests and earpieces, their movements synchronized and cold. "Mrs. Miller?" one of them said, his voice a flat monotone. "Mr. Miller is very concerned. We're here to take you to a private facility for your own safety." "Stay away from me," Sarah said, backing toward a concrete pillar. Her hand went to her pocket, but she had no weapon, only her recorder. The first man lunged. Sarah dodged, her foot catching on a discarded tricycle, a bright yellow ghost in the middle of the lot. She scrambled toward a parked car, a heavy old Cadillac. The men were closing in, their shadows long and jagged under the flickering motel sign. Sarah reached the driver's side of the Cadillac. The keys were in the ignition, a stroke of luck or a trap. She didn't care. She dived inside, slamming the lock just as a fist pounded against the glass. The sound was like a gunshot. She threw the car into reverse. The tires shrieked, a high-pitched scream of burning rubber. She saw the first man in the rearview mirror, his eyes widening as the heavy chrome bumper swung toward him. He dived out of the way, hitting the pavement hard. Sarah shifted into drive, floored the accelerator, and smashed through the wooden gate of the motel lot. The black SUV was right behind her, its headlights a pair of predatory eyes in the mirror. She drove like a madwoman, weaving through the narrow back streets of the industrial district. She knew the geometry of these roads, the way they angled toward the river. She took a sharp turn into a construction site, the car bouncing over ruts and gravel. She killed the lights and rolled behind a stack of steel I-beams. The black SUV roared past, its engine a receding thunder. Sarah sat in the dark, her hands shaking so hard she could barely grip the wheel. She waited for 10 minutes, the only sound the tink, tink, tink of the cooling engine. She needed to know what the world thought of her. She found a small diner on the edge of town, a place where the coffee was burnt and the patrons didn't look up from their plates. She sat in the back booth, her eyes fixed on the television mounted above the counter. A news anchor's voice cut through the low chatter of the diner. Breaking news out of Greenwich. Prominent architect Sarah Miller is wanted for questioning following an assault on a domestic worker. Her husband, Mark Miller, the CEO of Miller Dynamics, issued a statement earlier this morning. The screen cut to Mark. He stood on the steps of their home, looking haggard and heartbroken. Chloe stood behind him, her arm in a pristine white sling, her eyes downcast. "Sarah is a brilliant woman," Mark said into a cluster of microphones, his voice thick with performative grief. "But she has been struggling with a severe psychotic break. We tried to handle it privately, but she became violent. She's dangerous to herself and, tragically, to our son. We just want her to get the help she needs." The screen then showed a grainy video, the evidence. It was from the nursery camera. It showed Sarah standing over Leo's crib, her face distorted by the night vision, her lips moving in what looked like a silent scream. In the video, she appeared to be shaking the child, her movements jagged and terrifying. Sarah stared at the screen, her stomach churning. She remembered that night. Leo had been having a nightmare, and she had been rocking him, whispering, "Every step brings you closer to home." But the video had been edited, the frame rate altered to make her gentle rocking look like a violent assault. "He's turned the truth into a horror movie," she whispered. She went to a payphone and called Jennifer again. "Jen, did you see the news? It's a lie. He's faking the footage. It doesn't matter if it's fake, Sarah. Jennifer's voice was cold, professional. The judge saw it. Mark just called me. He's filed an emergency restraining order. If you come within 500 feet of that house, or Leo, you'll be arrested on sight. And Sarah, the police have a warrant. They're calling it kidnapping since you took those confidential medical files. I'm the mother, Jen. How can I kidnap my own life? On paper, Sarah, you're a stranger, and the law loves paper. Sarah hung up the phone. She felt the walls of the world closing in. She was a fugitive in her own town, a monster in the eyes of the public, and a ghost in the eyes of the law. She looked at the manila folder, the only thing she had left. She opened it again, digging deeper into the pockets of the leather. Her fingers brushed against something hard and flat. A digital drive. It was small, silver, and looked like a piece of jewelry. She remembered seeing Mark tuck it into his pocket during a meeting with James Wilson, his primary investor. Mark had called it his insurance policy. Sarah felt a spark of something, not hope, but a cold, architectural resolve. If Mark had built a cage for her, she would find the one bolt that, if removed, would bring the whole structure screaming down. She drove back to Greenwich under the cover of a moonless sky. She parked 3 blocks away from her house, in the driveway of a home she knew was vacant for the winter. She walked through the woods, the damp leaves muffling her footsteps. She reached the edge of her property. The house looked like a stage set, perfect, glowing with warm amber light. She crept toward the window of the living room, her heart a drum in her ears. She peered through the glass. Her breath hitched. There, sitting on the sofa where Sarah used to read to Leo, was a woman. She had dark hair, pinned back with a silver clip. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater that Sarah recognized. It was her own. The woman was holding Leo, who was nestled against her chest. Mark stood behind them, his hand resting on the woman's shoulder. He was smiling, a real, genuine smile that Sarah hadn't seen in years. This was Elena Vance. She wasn't just a name on a contract. She was a physical replacement. She moved like Sarah. She sat like Sarah. She even held the book at the same 90-degree angle Sarah always insisted on. It was like looking into a distorted mirror. Sarah felt a surge of white-hot rage. She didn't think. She didn't plan. She marched toward the front door and punched in the security code. Access denied. The keypad emitted a low, mocking hum. Sarah hammered on the door, her fists bruising against the heavy oak. "Mark, open this door. Leo, it's Mommy." The door opened. Mark stood there, his silver-flecked hair perfectly groomed, his eyes cold and unblinking. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "Sarah," he said, his voice a low, paternalistic murmur. "You shouldn't be here. The police are on their way." "Who is she, Mark? Who is that woman in my house?" Elena appeared in the hallway, still holding Leo. The boy looked terrified, his wide eyes darting between the 2 women. "1, 2, 3, he whispered, his voice a tiny, broken thread. "Mommy?" Leo cried out, reaching for Sarah. Sarah lunged. She pushed past Mark, her fingers grazing Leo's pajama sleeve. But Elena pulled back, her movement stiff and rehearsed. "Get away from him," Elena shouted, her voice a perfect chilling imitation of Sarah's own cadence. Sarah grabbed Elena's hair, a desperate primal clawing. They tumbled onto the manicured lawn, a blur of cashmere and rage. Sarah scratched, pulled, and screamed, trying to reach her son. She felt Elena's nails dig into her cheek, the smell of lavender and expensive perfume filling her nose. Suddenly, a heavy weight slammed into Sarah's side. Mark had tackled her. He threw her onto the pavement with brutal, clinical force. Sarah's shoulder hit the stone walkway with a sickening thud, and her head snapped back against the ground. "You're sick, Sarah," Mark said, standing over her, his shadow blocking out the stars. "Look at you, rolling on the ground like an animal. This is why Leo needs a stable environment." Subverted. Sarah pushed herself up, her vision swimming. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the silver digital drive. "I have it, Mark," she gasped, her voice thick with blood and spit. "I have the offshore ledger. I know about the accounts in the Caymans. I know about the skimming from the Wilson project. If you don't give me Leo, I'll take this to the feds. I'll burn your whole world down." She waited for the fear to hit his eyes. She waited for the leverage to work, for the smart, logical move to pay off. She had the evidence. She had the insurance policy. Mark didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the drive. Instead, he let out a short, dry laugh, the sound of a man watching a child try to cast a spell. "The ledger?" Mark stepped closer, his boots clicking on the stone. "Sarah, honey, do you really think I'd leave the keys to my kingdom in a safe you knew the combination to? That drive isn't a ledger. It's a honeypot." Sarah looked down at the silver drive. A cold prickle of unease danced across her skin. "Go ahead," Mark said, gesturing toward the house. "Plug it in. It's filled with evidence. Evidence of your identity theft. It's a log of every time you tried to access my personal accounts, every time you stole money to fund your escape. I put it there months ago, Sarah. I knew you'd go for it the moment you felt cornered. It's not my offshore ledger. It's your confession." Sarah felt the world collapse. The drive felt hot in her hand, like a piece of burning coal. She had thought she was being smart, that she was playing the game. But Mark had been 3 steps ahead, using her own desperation to build a digital paper trail that would bury her. "And even if it were the real ledger," Mark added, leaning down so his face was inches from hers, "you couldn't open it. The real files are locked with a biometric key. My thumbprint, Sarah. Only mine. You're holding a piece of plastic that just turned you from a confused wife into a corporate saboteur." He stood up and adjusted his tie. Once, twice, 3 times. "Take her away," he said. 2 police cruisers pulled into the driveway, their blue and red lights painting the eggshell White House in the colors of a disaster. Sarah sat on the pavement, the silver drive lying in the dirt next to her. Realizing she hadn't just lost her son, she had handed Mark the shovel he was going to use to bury her. The holding cell smelled of bleach and despair. Sarah sat on the thin, plastic-covered mattress, the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of the metal toilet in the corner sounding like a countdown to the end of her life. She was a placeholder who had been discarded, a mother who had been erased. But as she sat there, her fingers tracing the grout lines in the concrete wall, her architectural mind began to work. She thought about the Greenwich Charity Gala. She knew the venue, the Grand Metropolitan. She had designed the renovation of the mechanical rooms 3 years ago. She knew every air duct, every service tunnel, every hidden door. She knew that James Wilson would be there. And she knew that Mark, in his arrogance, would have the real ledger with him, tucked into his pocket like a trophy. The next morning, Jennifer Brown arrived. She looked tired, her bright yellow suit a sharp contrast to the gray gloom of the jail. "I can get you out on bail," Jennifer said, her voice low. "But Sarah, there's a warrant. You've been charged with corporate espionage and violation of a restraining order. They're going to take you to a psychiatric facility for evaluation the moment you step out of here." "I don't need bail, Jen. I need a dress. Sarah escaped the placeholder life not by fighting the law, but by navigating the structure. She used her one phone call to contact a former contractor, a man who owed her a favor from the Shard project. He met her behind the jail, providing a change of clothes and a service key to the Grand Metropolitan. The gala was a sea of silk and shadows. Sarah slipped through the service entrance, the roar of the industrial fans in the mechanical room drowning out the sound of the string quartet above. She moved through the darkness, her feet sure on the metal catwalks she had designed. She found the VIP lounge, a secluded room hidden behind a velvet curtain near the boilers. She waited. James Wilson entered first, his gold ring clacking against a glass of scotch. He looked like a man who owned the world, but Sarah knew he was a man who hated being cheated. "Mr. Wilson," she said, stepping out of the shadows. He spun around, his eyes narrowing. "Sarah Miller, you're supposed to be in a cell." "I was. But I thought you'd want to see the real blueprints for your investment." She didn't show him the honeypot drive. She showed him her recorder. She played the audio of Mark in the nursery, talking about the replacement. And then she showed him the architectural logs, the real ones, that showed Mark had been overcharging Wilson for materials and pocketing the difference to pay Elena Vance's fixer fee. "He's not just replacing a wife, James," Sarah said, her voice cold and precise. "He's replacing your money with his own." The confrontation with Mark was snappy, a surgical strike in the middle of a room full of his peers. Sarah lured him into the lounge, the smell of scorched dust and expensive cologne clashing in the air. "Sign it, Mark," she said, laying a single sheet of paper on the table. It was a full confession of the adoption fraud and a voluntary surrender of custody. "Or what?" Mark sneered, reaching for his phone. "I'll have security throw you out." "Or James Wilson tells the FBI agents in the lobby about the $6 million you skimmed from the Greenwich project. Your thumbprint, Mark. Unlock the real ledger on your phone. Show him the accounts." Mark looked at Wilson, who was standing in the doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. The rhythmic pop of Mark's knuckles echoed in the small room. He looked at the paper, then at Sarah. For the first time, his eyes blinked. The ending wasn't a loud explosion. It was a quiet, structural collapse. Elena Vance, seeing the foundation crumbling, provided the final blow. She wasn't a mother. She was a professional. And a professional knows when to switch sides. She turned over the original, unedited nursery tapes in exchange for immunity. The story ended not in Greenwich, but in Seattle, where the sky was a constant protective gray. Sarah sat on a bench in a park overlooking the Sound, the smell of salt and rain filling her lungs. Leo was a few yards away, counting the steps of a wooden play structure. 1, 2, 3, 4. He reached the top and looked back at her. "Mommy, I'm home." Sarah didn't reach for her recorder. She didn't check the timestamp. She just smiled, feeling the solid, unbreakable weight of her own existence. She wasn't a placeholder. She was the one who had built a life out of the ruins of a lie. And this time, the structure was built to last.